There's an experience nearly every person carries inside them, yet most never speak its name, the moment you realized you were standing outside the circle. Picture a young soul at recess, frozen at the edge while others chase and giggle, forming bonds that feel impenetrable. Their fingers twitch nervously, pulse quickening. They search for the reason behind this barrier they cannot name. Initially, it stings briefly, seemingly temporary. Yet as minutes stretch into patterns, something deeper etches itself into their memory. If that sensation resonates with you, you already understand how weighted quietness becomes when rejection fills every silence. And if you've escaped that particular pain, you've likely encountered its shadow elsewhere in your journey. This dynamic transcends schoolyards. It emerges in educational settings, within family structures, across professional environments, throughout entire societies. The mechanics driving it hold more influence than most recognize. Here's what neuroscience reveals. Humans need social connection with the same biological urgency as nourishment, hydration, and safety. Brain researchers have uncovered that social rejection fires up identical neural pathways as bodily harm. This explains why a dismissive glance or whispered conversation can leave marks invisible to the eye but visceral in experience. For developing minds still constructing their worldview, these encounters penetrate extraordinarily deep. They transcend fleeting incidents. They become reflective surfaces silently declaring, "Your presence holds no value. Your essence falls short." The sidelined youngster doesn't merely lose access to activities. They shoulder the burden of being unseen. And sustained invisibility fundamentally alters self-perception. But what drives this intensity of suffering? To understand that, we must journey backward through time itself, beyond individual childhoods into humanity's ancestral past. Throughout evolutionary history, connection wasn't preference, it meant survival itself. An isolated human-facing wilderness faced vulnerability. Bonding equaled safety. It ensured shared resources, collective vigilance against threats, collaborative shelter construction. Our nervous systems evolved sophisticated warning mechanisms. Being pushed out equals mortal danger. Even now, when tribal membership no longer determines physical survival, our biology responds identically. The marginalized child doesn't simply experience sadness. Their system registers existential threat at preverbal levels. Stress chemicals flood their bloodstream. Their mind hyper-focuses on detecting every nuance of dismissal, each overlooked gesture, each unshared moment of joy. Gradually, anticipation forms. The young person begins forecasting rejection before manifestation. They withhold contributions, they retreat to peripheries, they self-edit compulsively, they internalize the conviction, remaining unnoticed might prevent further abandonment. Now consider how this blueprint unfolds across decades. Academic settings transform into corporate landscapes. Playgrounds morph into societal structures. Unless intervention disrupts the cycle, that invisible barrier persists. They might accumulate achievements. They might populate their lives with relationships. Yet beneath surface success, that sidelined child continues murmuring, "What happens when they discover the truth? Where do I actually fit?" The cruel paradox. This very terror of ostracism generates behaviors that complicate genuine connection. They become excessively guarded, desperately clingy, or excessively concealed. Rejection's anguish becomes prophecy fulfilling itself. But here's where complexity deepens, simultaneously fascinating and tragic. Exclusion doesn't solely mold the rejected, it shapes those doing the rejecting equally. Young people quickly learn who commands group authority. Sometimes marginalization isn't deliberate cruelty. It functions as belonging testing, boundary reinforcement, tribal declaration. We constitute us, and you represent other. Behavioral scientists label this in-group, out-group dynamics, manifesting everywhere from childhood rituals to international relations. Our belonging hunger runs so deep that sometimes we push others aside merely to solidify our position. While the isolated child sustains injury, those enacting exclusion simultaneously absorb lessons about authority, compassion, and identity formation. These microscopic moments generate waves affecting not merely individual narratives, but cultural consciousness. What amplifies this power? Exclusion fundamentally constructs identity. Imagine a youngster repeatedly denied game participation. Eventually, they may determine not that others behave unkindly, but that their own being lacks worth. This represents the mind's dangerous interpretation. We internalize dismissal. Rather than thinking, "they left me out," the child concludes, "I embody someone inherently unincludable." This conviction crystallizes into core self-concept, and self-concept directs every subsequent decision. Decades forward, that individual might hesitate pursuing opportunities, entering partnerships, or revealing creative work, not from capability absence, but from deeply embedded outsider belief. One playground afternoon becomes a lifetime of holding back. Yet here lies the paradox worth examining. Numerous world changers, profound thinkers, and deeply compassionate souls were once marginalized children. Why does this pattern exist? Because rejection grants unique observational perspective. When positioned externally looking inward, you perceive what insiders overlook. You detect patterns. You analyze interpersonal mechanics. You cultivate empathy for others society disregards. Suffering, when transmuted, becomes heightened perception. This doesn't justify the damage. Scars remain undeniable. But occasionally those scars transform into navigation charts, helping individuals understand humanity more profoundly. Countless groundbreaking literary works, philosophical frameworks, and artistic expressions emerge from voices once positioned beyond acceptance circles. The marginalized child, upon finding restoration, frequently becomes the adult amplifying silenced perspectives. However, healing never manifests accidentally. It demands awareness operating on individual and collective dimensions. Personally, it means distinguishing your identity from your circumstances. You experienced exclusion, but exclusion doesn't define your essence. You felt erased, but you are not erasure itself. Collectively, it requires recognizing subtle mechanisms perpetuating invisible divisions. Whose perspectives receive invitations into dialogue? Whose expressions get elevated? Who remains unnoticed not through malice, but through unconscious habit? Every culture, classroom, and workplace carries these undercurrents, and ignoring them costs immensely. Not just for individuals pushed aside, but for collective richness forfeited when voices remain unheard. Another dimension many overlook: children don't exclusively learn exclusion from peers, they absorb it from adults too. An educator unconsciously favoring vocal students can deepen quieter children's silence. Parents overwhelmed by personal challenges can leave children feeling invisible. Even well-intentioned families sometimes miss emotional requirements of children defying expected templates. When youngsters sense this dismissal at home, wounds cut deepest because home should guarantee unconditional belonging. Developmental psychology studies demonstrate that children consistently experiencing emotional marginalization, even subtly, face elevated risks for anxiety disorders, depression, and adult trust difficulties. It's not single moments, but accumulated patterns. Young brains function as pattern recognition systems. When detected patterns communicate, "I don't fit," that belief reverberates across years. Still, amid this pain exists genuine hope. Neural pathways aren't permanent. Identity sense isn't fixed. Neuroscience confirms that through fresh experiences, new relationships, and transformed self-understanding, we can literally reconstruct established patterns. The marginalized child within can integrate different lessons. They can recognize that exclusion never proved inadequacy. It only revealed human groups' fragility, others' awareness limitations, and universal struggles surrounding belonging. Actually, understanding that virtually everyone has occupied that outsider position can itself catalyze healing, because suddenly the division isn't between yourself and humanity. The barrier represents illusion constructed from fearful moments, but it doesn't determine life's entirety. So let me pose this question. If nearly all humans have tasted rejection, what shifts when we remember that truth during daily interactions? What if rather than unconsciously perpetuating exclusion cycles, we became intentional inclusion architects? What if whenever noticing someone at margins, you asked yourself, what small gesture could help them feel witnessed right now? Sometimes it's merely sustained eye contact, authentic smiling, or genuine inquiry. To groups, it might seem insignificant. To the sidelined child, it resembles sunlight-piercing storm clouds. This transcends abstract theory. Belonging research shows even modest gestures dramatically alter trajectories. One investigation found that when educators wrote affirming feedback on assignments, students not only improved academically, but reported heightened connection and confidence. Another study revealed that workplaces cultivating inclusive cultures demonstrated superior creativity, enhanced performance, and reduced turnover. Inclusion isn't merely compassion. It unlocks human capacity. Every welcomed back marginalized child doesn't just heal. They return carrying insight depths the group might never independently discover. But another reason this narrative matters profoundly. It's not exclusively about childhood events, but about what early injuries teach regarding human nature itself. Feeling excluded means confronting existence's most primitive terror, being solitary in a universe seeming vast and indifferent. Yet paradoxically, this identical experience illuminates our deepest shared yearning, being seen, comprehended, and accepted authentically. The marginalized child isn't just a playground figure. The marginalized child mirrors the human condition universally. Consider it carefully. Every culture, every philosophy, every spiritual tradition fundamentally wrestles with this inquiry. Where do I belong? Who am I relative to others? Exclusion's pain reminds us how delicate self-perception can be, but also how remarkably resilient we become when seeking belonging, not just externally, but internally. This represents among the most transformative shifts achievable, recognizing that belonging isn't solely group-granted, but something we cultivate inwardly. For the marginalized child maturing into adulthood, restoration frequently begins when recognizing that external belonging absence doesn't indicate internal worth absence. Still, that's simpler stated than accomplished because exclusion leaves resonances. It surfaces in hesitation before contributing to group discussions, in second-guessing whether your story holds significance, in preemptively shrinking aspirations before others can dismiss them. These echoes may be subtle, yet they're tangible. However, here psychology offers pathways forward. Studies indicate that when people reframe past experiences, not as personal deficiencies but as universal human struggles, they begin loosening old wounds' grip. Instead of declaring, "I was rejected because I wasn't enough," the narrative transforms to, "I was rejected because every group, every human, struggles with fear and boundaries." This reframing doesn't erase suffering, but it transforms meaning. And meaning ultimately converts wounds into wisdom. There's a powerful concept in developmental psychology termed post-traumatic growth. It describes how individuals, after experiencing hardship, can actually develop greater empathy, deeper resilience, and stronger purpose. The marginalized child, given healing opportunities, frequently becomes the adult noticing isolated colleagues, listening when others don't, creating welcoming spaces they once desperately needed. This way, exclusion's pain can ripple outward into compassionate actions transforming lives. It's as though acknowledged wounds become doorways not merely back into belonging, but into creating belonging for others. Yet we shouldn't romanticize rejection. It inflicts damage. It's something no child should endure. Understanding this psychology matters not to validate exclusion as somehow beneficial, but to recognize our powerful role in either perpetuating or interrupting it. Daily, we face crossroads with our words, attention, and awareness. We either reinforce invisible divisions or begin dismantling them. We either teach children through silence that exclusion is normal, or teach them through compassion that every voice deserves table space. Make no mistake, stakes are substantial. Marginalized children face higher academic withdrawal risks, social disengagement, and participation anxiety. Over time, these patterns cascade into adulthood, affecting relationships, careers, even physical health. Loneliness, after all, isn't merely emotional. It's biological stress. Research demonstrates chronic loneliness weakens immune function, elevates inflammation, and reduces life expectancy. This means that playground exclusion moment isn't trivial. It's the seed of outcomes reaching far into futures. Understanding this makes how we treat others in small moments appear far more significant. But let's pause here considering the opposite. If exclusion can shape lives painfully, then inclusion can shape them healingly. A single welcoming moment, A single recognition gesture can redirect a child's narrative. An educator noticing the withdrawn student. A peer inviting the overlooked kid into activities. A parent affirming their child's uniqueness rather than comparing them to others. These moments may appear small, but psychologically they're monumental. They communicate to the child, your place is here, you're among us, your existence matters. When a child internalizes that message, their entire reality transforms. The invisible barrier begins dissolving. Truth is, we all possess power to be that person for children, friends, strangers, even ourselves. Remembering what being excluded felt like provides a map guiding us toward creating connection. Every time you choose listening when ignoring would be easier. Every time you create space for someone left aside, you're not just changing a moment, you're changing a pattern. When patterns change, lives change. Now, let's push this deeper. What does it mean philosophically to inhabit a world where exclusion is so prevalent? Some philosophers suggest exclusion is unavoidable, that whenever humans form groups, boundaries materialize and someone gets left outside. Truth may exist there, but inevitability differs from destiny. We may not completely eliminate exclusion, but we can transform our responses to it. We can choose recognizing that exclusion reveals more about group fragility than individual worth. Recognizing that, we can begin living differently. Not pursuing belonging as value proof, but offering belonging as humanity's act. The marginalized child then becomes instructor. An instructor in empathy, in resilience, in carrying pain, yet choosing love. Many of us still carry that child internally. And perhaps the most profound healing act is turning to that inner child and speaking the words they always required. You belong. You always belonged. Even when others couldn't perceive it, your worth never diminished. Speaking those words even silently can shift an entire life's trajectory. Because belonging at its deepest level isn't about fitting into circles others draw. It's about realizing the circle was never closed initially. We're already part of something larger, something infinite, something human. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a challenge. To notice the marginalized child both in our surrounding world and within ourselves. To ask, where are the invisible divisions I'm maintaining consciously or unconsciously? Who around me feels unseen, unheard, uninvited, and what small act could I offer today to remind them of their place in humanity's story? These aren't abstract inquiries. They're practical. Because in every classroom, every family, every workplace, someone right now feels exclusion's ache. Your awareness, your gesture, your invitation might be the turning point in their narrative. And here's the final thought. The marginalized child is not a weakness symbol, but a truth symbol. They remind us that every human being carries identical longing, to be part of something, to matter, to be witnessed. When we remember that, when we honor that, we begin constructing a different kind of world. A world where belonging is not a prize requiring earning, but a gift meant for sharing. A world where nobody must stand on sidelines wondering what invisible wall blocks them. A world where the words we offer, the spaces we create, the compassion we extend quietly but powerfully rewrite the story. So next time you see someone standing alone or feel yourself retreating into silence, remember this. The marginalized child story doesn't have to end in exclusion. It can end in recognition. It can end in connection. It can end in the simple radical act of saying, you belong. And perhaps in saying it to others, we finally learn to believe it ourselves. If this perspective resonated with you, hit that like button for Winds of Thought and let's keep this conversation alive. What moment of exclusion taught you the most about yourself? Drop your thoughts below.